Double digits in the Nosebleeds section. Welcome to episode 11 of FTN from the Nosebleeds MMA podcast, hosted by myself, Blake Arulian, and my good pal, Brick Harris. We are installed in the FTN studio, ready to give you news, updates, and analysis on all things MMA. A special thanks always to Don't Be a Richard Music, Robert Jemias, and Sosi Wear Clothing. Content provided by Verdict MMA, Octagon Updates, Geek MMA, and of course, your hosts. Brick, I've missed you, man. How are you feeling today?
You know, I'm feeling good. We're both coming off a little bit of sickies.
Yeah.
We both had the sickies for the last couple of weeks.
Flu's been going around, man.
So that's why there was no episode last week. But, I mean, last weekend there wasn't much to talk about, right?
Well.
Someone went to sleep, and so, I went to sleep watching.
Yeah.
All right, coming up in today's show, the rundown for today's show, episode 11. So, in light of the BMF title this weekend, we are going to be giving our top 5 active BMFs in the UFC today. Round 1, we are going to discuss the debatable topic of Ben Askren, and was he rushed in his career? Did he deserve to be put to sleep twice and get that one win with Robbie Lawler? Was his career in the UFC, pressured, you could say? Round 2, Corey Anderson versus Johnny Walker. And basically throughout the rest of the rounds and the rest of the show, we're just going to be giving fight picks. We're going to be talking about UFC 244 in its glory, comparing fighters, making picks, making decisions. So round 3, we're going to talk Kevin Lee, Gregor Gillespie. Round 4, it's Derek Lewis and Blagoy Ivanov. That's going to be a fun one.
Yes, I'm very excited to talk about that.
And then round 5, we're going to get to the main events. And as I like to call it, the meat and potatoes. Thompson versus Luque, Till versus Gastelum, and Masvidal versus Diaz. We are going to really try to get through this show without going over an hour, but it's going to be a tough one.
It's going to be a long show. I'm super excited. But first, Brick, I think you have something to say, don't you?
I do. I've got a little bit to say concerning my final thoughts, and I figured I would flip the script a little bit today since I consider myself a BMF before I knew what that meant. So, I'm going to give my final thoughts at the beginning because my final thoughts have a lot to do with what we're going to be talking about today, and I just like to get some things off of my chest. So as we get set for UFC 244, arguably one of the most stacked cards of the year, I just have a little something to say about what has become of the UFC and what has become of the event this weekend that is known as the BMF title. Let me explain something to you and to everyone who's listening. The BMF title is not a belt. It's nothing that has formerly existed in the decades of the UFC's history. There is nothing that has ever existed called the BMF title. There's never been this prestigious of an event for two guys who have lost as many as these guys have. These two have never held real titles. They've never been champions in the UFC. Both of them have double-digit losses. Both of them are what we would refer to as in the past as journeymen. A lot of people would call these two, like you said in the past, a couple episodes ago, journeymen or gatekeepers. These are the types of fighters that guys come in and expect to not get knocked out by necessarily, unless you're Ben Askren. Well, they expect to go the distance with these guys because these guys are brawlers. These guys are hardcore bangers. Now, what we have here are two of the most bad MFs in the game today. That's what they've been claiming. That's what everyone knows. And as we go on with our lists here in a minute of who the top 5 BMFs are in the UFC, I just want to give a bit of a definition. Now, if you really understand what a BMF is in the UFC, you understand that these people are here to fight other people. That is it. You take guys like Nate Diaz, you take guys like Jorge Masvidal. Do you know how much people get fined for not showing up to UFC press conferences? For Nate Diaz smoking blunts at his open workouts? For Jorge Masvidal going backstage and giving a 3-piece and a soda? These people get fined. They lose money for doing the things that they do that make them BMFs, but they don't care. Conor McGregor throwing water bottles across the stage, doing all the antics that he does. These are the things that make fighters BMFs, but they don't care because they're not here to have a spotless, undefeated record. They're not here necessarily to hold real physical UFC belts. They are here to fight. And that may be by words, that may be with water bottles, they may be behind the curtain where no one else can see. It doesn't matter. These guys are here to fight. And that, in my opinion, is what makes a BMF. So before we jump into our top 5, I just want everyone to realize that these guys lose money by being BMFs. This is not a show that they're putting on that the UFC is telling them to continue to do, because they are fiscally irresponsible by doing the things that they do, but they don't care because they are bad MFs. Thank you. I almost got so excited. Thank you for stopping me.
I just want to say something. I know this is your final thought, but I just have something that I really want to say is the common ground between Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal is not only their weight class and their style of fighting and things like that, but how many times both of these guys have lost decision to the decision.
Right.
And I think one thing that's big in being a BMF is going in there and just fighting, not thinking about, oh, well, I've lost this round in striking, so I got to get 2 takedowns before the end of the round. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
These guys don't care about that. They are in there and they treat it like a street fight. And that's what I think makes this so much fun.
And it's not to say that these guys aren't tactical. I mean, we saw Jorge Masvidal practice the flying knee before doing it to Ben Askren.
Incredible.
Insane. Like, these guys are smart. They're not just monkeys going out there and swinging limbs. Like, they're super smart fighters, but at the same time, they're bad MFs. So they don't listen to Dana White. They don't listen to the system. They don't
It's
care.
not the system. That's it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They don't care about the system. They don't care about the organization of the UFC. They care about themselves and making money, and sometimes losing money, being a bad MF and getting to punch people in the face for a living. So with that being said, Blake, I just want to know, who is your top 5?
All right, for my top 5 current BMFs, other than Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal.
Yeah, let's just make that clear. Other than Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal.
Because when I was making this list, I was like, man, it really is Diaz and Masvidal. There's nobody else that's more of a BMF than these two. But these top 5 are right there. I'm going to go with number 5 with Tony Ferguson. I think Tony is one of those guys that is always down to fight. He usually only gets about 1 fight a year, but when he does, obviously, he comes to fight and he comes to play. But Tony Ferguson is one of those guys that has never backed down, in my opinion, and from what I can remember, really from anybody. He's always been down to fight the next best guy. He's always been willing to do it, and he goes out and performs. So I'm going to go with that for number 5. Number 4, I'm going to go with Mike Perry, one of those guys that, despite whatever is going on in that octagon, he's going to keep coming forward, just like a Nate Diaz. He doesn't want to get, he doesn't care if, like, what's going on in the fight. All he wants to do is get in there and continue to keep going. That guy is a tank. Number 3, I'm going to go with Jeremy Stephens. Like you said, another gatekeeper, a guy who has a high amount of losses. But that doesn't really mean much to Jeremy Stephens because he's been, 1, a staple of the featherweight division for so long, and 2, he's just a guy that likes to go in there no matter who it is. Like I said in my final thought a couple weeks ago, when Conor was at the top of his career, he came out and said, hey, I'll fight you. And then he gets turned into a meme of who the F is that guy, and he really hasn't. That meme isn't dead by any means. Like, people still use that all the time, but that's just Jeremy Stephens. He's not afraid to go out there and say, hey, I don't care how good you are. I think I'm better than you. Number 2, I'm going to go with Robbie Lawler, an absolute vet, maybe a little past his prime, but somebody who still has some of the most memorable. I think if you were to take hardcore MMA fans and poll the greatest fight of all time, it's Rory McDonald, Robbie Lawler. Everybody loves that fight. Robbie Lawler is one of those guys who forever has just been, the nicest guy outside of the octagon, but as soon as he gets in there, he's there to crush your head. He's there to take your head off. Like, you remember when he lost to Ben Askren? He was smashing his face like Ben Askren had done something to him. I remember just like the meanness and the anger. And as soon as he lost, he's like, yeah, it's all good. He argued with Herb Dean a little bit, but Robbie Lawler is one of those guys that as soon as that bell rings, it's time to go to war. Yeah. And that is a BMF in my opinion. And number 1, I'm going to go with the man, Cowboy Cerrone. That guy is, I think it's a good thing, but also a bad thing in some points. And I'm going to talk about that in a few weeks. He's kind of a yes man. And that's what Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal are. They don't care who they fight. They don't care if they win or if they lose. They want to go in there and they want to fight. And to me, Cowboy is that yes man. He is that other BMF that is absolutely deserving of a title like the BMF.
I totally agree. It's funny. We have a couple in common, actually, in these lists. And I'm super excited to give mine and explain a little bit of where they come from. Now, there are a couple of fighters that I guess didn't realize were inactive or are less active than they could be. So you might have to correct me on a couple of them. But right away, I want to give my honorable mention to Chuck Liddell. He was my number one, right? Oh, yeah. He was my number one BMF, and it took me a little bit to realize, oh, yeah, he hasn't been active for a little while. Dang it, right? So other than that, Chuck Liddell, Jeremy Stevens in my honorable mention. And I don't really want to give a ranking to my top 5 because I don't really know where to put them. It seems kind of disrespectful to the 2 BMFs to put any of these guys at number 1 for me, just because I don't know, it feels like I'm neglecting the 2 majors. So here are my top 5, no specific order: Donald Cerrone, Amanda Nunes, Mark Hunt, Conor McGregor, and Robbie Lawler. Now let me explain those a little bit. Donald Cerrone is obvious. You said it yourself. The guy is a yes man, but I think in a good way. Like, some of his most impressive fights were off of yeses, and some of his most, sad fights, most recently losing to Justin Gaethje, was a yes fight. That was just him saying, yeah, I'll do it. Same with Donald Cerrone. I don't believe he's ever held the belt at the lightweight division. Journeyman, lots of losses. But he's a dog. There's no one who disrespects Cowboy Cerrone. There's not a single person in the game who can successfully disrespect Cowboy Cerrone and get away with it, right? He's such a good dude. He's a good father. But when, like you said, when he gets in the cage, he's terrifying. Amanda Nunes. This should be a little bit obvious. 2 weight class champion. Still a couple losses, and I talked about this a little bit ago, how the most prestigious thing you can have in the UFC is an undefeated record. Not if you want to be a BMF. If you're trying to be a BMF, I feel like you need losses. You need to be able to show the world that you can lose and come back. That's why I wouldn't put Khabib Nurmagomedov in this list, and that's why I put Amanda Nunes with a couple of losses that she has. She's avenged those losses. She's gone back and forth from weight classes. She is the most dominant female fighter in the world today.
Of all time.
Sure, yeah. I mean, we'll see. We'll see with Tatiana Suarez in the future, but yes. Now, Mark Hunt. This one was for me super easy.
Yeah.
This dude leads the UFC in walk-off wins. There's no one else in the UFC who has thrown one punch and literally turned his back to his opponent and just said, yeah, it's over. He decides. You know the meme when they say he called game? Mm-hmm. That's what Mark Hunt does. He's done that more than anyone else, but also interesting about Mark Hunt, he has more losses in his career than he has wins. Yeah. And this is kind of where you might need to help me. I don't know exactly how active he is. He hasn't fought since December of 2018.
I believe he's still active. Right. I believe he's still on the roster.
Okay. So yeah, technically still active. That's a fuzzy definition, but I just want to go through the guys that he has lost to, because the guys that he's lost to is almost more impressive than anyone he's ever beat, right? I love looking at this list, okay? Lost to Fedor Emelianenko, Alistar Overeem, Gegard Mousasi. Let's see, who else? Shik Kongo. He actually defeated Shik Kongo, defeated Stefan Struve, lost to Junior Dos Santos, defeated Roy Nelson, lost to Fabricio Verdum, Stipe Miocic, Alistar Overeem again, Curtis Blades, defeated Derek Lewis, drew to Brock Lesnar, defeated Frank Mir. Like, this dude is the definition of a heavyweight journeyman. I don't think there's anyone else in the heavyweight division that compares to this guy's resume. Even before he was in the UFC, he was fighting guys like Fedor, and he fought Alistar Overeem and Gegard Mousasi before he was in the league. So this dude, as far as the heavyweight division, I think takes the cake in any standard of the definition of a BMF. Now, my last fighter that I would like to talk about, second to last, Robbie Lawler. That's an easy one. Like you said, holds probably the best fight in UFC history. Absolute great guy, but once he gets in there, he's terrifying. He has the record to show that he's a BMF. He's not so much a yes man as he is an entertainer, and that's what I like about him. Now, Conor McGregor. Everyone loves Conor McGregor, and the reason why he makes it into my top 5 BMFs is because he does it differently than any other superstar that we've seen come in and kind of make a media spike, right? Like, we've seen fighters come in and just be super exciting and take control of the media for a few months and just kind of become the UFC guy, but he's been through more than I think any UFC champion ever has. Like, as far as suspensions, as far as shenanigans outside of the UFC, excuse me, serving on probation legally. Like, this dude has been through it. And the reason he's a BMF is because he announced just this last week a formal return to the UFC. And he stood in front of hundreds of Russian reporters, had a shoe thrown at him. Like, this dude is not scared of anything. He wanted Khabib in Moscow, the dude that embarrassed him with an overhand right and then a neck crank. Like, Conor McGregor, to me, is the definition of a true comeback. Now, we'll see if he can truly come back and get back into the winning column and possibly in title contention. But he is a BMF for throwing water bottles. The interviews that he has went viral. He is the meme of the UFC, but not because he's silly, because he wanted to fight Floyd Mayweather, and he did. Because he wanted to fight Khabib in Moscow, didn't in Moscow, but he fought him. And he captivated the world when he threw a dolly through a bus. I mean, this man just personifies violence. And I think that's sometimes what a BMF does. So there's my top 5.
Alrighty, Brick, let's jump into our one and only, sophisticated round of this episode. We're going to do a That's Debatable of Ben Askren. Was he rushed? Did he deserve any tune-up fights or anything like that? Was there too much pressure on him coming into the UFC?
I think yes and no. I know your answer already, so I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate. But I think yes. It's hard to say yes and no. Ben Askren came in as a complete superstar, and he was given fighters that I would never have given a star just coming into the division. Conor McGregor got tune-up fights. Israel Adesanya got tune-up fights. Let's see. Habib, thank you. Habib got tune-up fights. Like superstars who come into the league and everyone knows they're going to be good have received tune-up fights, lots of them. So I think in a way, yes, Ben Askren was rushed. Just because you have an incredible background in wrestling doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be able to stand and strike with these guys. And his UFC debut was against a Robbie Lawler, who former welterweight champ, right? Just an absolute tank, really good striker. So I think they put Ben Askren through the ringer for the first couple months of his career, and I don't necessarily think that you're right, that it was fair. I think he was rushed.
I have to disagree, and here's why. I think Ben Askren had so much going for him, and he was so hyped. The guy was on Joe Rogan. The guy was talked about all over all the MMA podcasts. Man, just wait till Ben Askren gets into the UFC. I can't believe Ben Askren isn't in the UFC. He's always been almost universally known, right there with Rickson Gracie, as the greatest to never come into the UFC canvas. And once that trade finally happened of Demetrius Johnson for Ben Askren, it became a huge thing. And I think the bigger thing is there's just been so many eyes on Ben Askren, right? He, from the beginning, has been the guy, and he was such a loudmouth for his first 1.5 fights. After the Jorge Masvidal fight, he kind of, quieted down and humbled himself. But for the most part, Ben Askren has wanted all of that. He wanted the opportunity, like he said on Hawani's show yesterday. He wanted the opportunity to come into the UFC and see what he could do. And I don't think he was rushed by any means. What was he? He was 17-0 coming into the UFC, undefeated, 2-time champion. And he was and an Olympian in 2008. He was absolutely had the resume to face off against these bigger guys, and he was so hyped and he was so ready for all those things. He didn't want tune-up fights. By no means, I don't think he didn't want Robbie Lawler. He actually wanted Darren Till. And then once Jorge Masvidal knocked out Darren Till, he went up against Jorge Masvidal. But let's not forget that if he would have beat Jorge Masvidal, he would have been right there for the welterweight championship against Kamaru Usman. So at the end of the day, I think Ben Askren was by no means rushed. I think Ben Askren just didn't realize how much that he didn't want it anymore, because he did come out of retirement. He hadn't fought for 2 years. Coming into his UFC debut against Robbie Lawler, he didn't want to fight he was done. And so that's why he actually talked about it in his his pictures for the UFC, like when they do tail of the tape and things like that. He looks like super big and pudgy. He's like, dude, I was over 200 pounds in that picture because he's like, I had been retired for 2 years. I didn't even care. And so, in my opinion, I don't think that he was rushed. I think that Ben Askren didn't want it as much as he thought he did.
So you're saying he wasn't necessarily rushed by the league, but maybe he rushed himself?
Possibly. And how could he have not? How could he not? I mean, you are literally the most hyped person to come into the UFC. If Rickson Gracie came into the UFC in 1996, 1997, when it kind of started to solidify and become an actual fighting league, Rickson would have been rushed, right? Same thing with Ben Askren, but Ben Askren actually had to live it, and he went up against one of the greatest welterweights of all time. Then he went up and went against one of the craziest strikes of all time. And then he fought probably the greatest grappler, at least jiu-jitsu practitioner, right there with Royce Gracie in the history of the UFC. And Royce Gracie, I don't even know, I think Damian Maia might even be better than Royce.
See, last thing, before we close it out, I just want to say there is a system to being successful in the UFC. Yeah. As much as we don't want to admit it, tune-up fights, getting a first couple of wins in the UFC, just getting your feet wet and getting a feel for the experience is kind of necessary if you want to be successful. Ben Askren may not have been rushed by the UFC, as you said, but he didn't obey the system. He came in and he lowered his head and he said, I want this, I want this, I want this, without really understanding that if you come into the UFC and you lose 2 of your first 3 fights, 2 of them going to sleep, that's not good.
And let's not forget, this is the UFC. This isn't, unfortunately, as much as I respect those other leagues and as much as those fighters are great, this isn't Bellator, this isn't ONE, this isn't Ryzen, this isn't PFL. This is the UFC. This is the granddaddy of them all.
You don't come into the UFC and joke around. Yeah. This is Fight Club.
All right, let's jump into sort of round 2. Let's just jump into all these fight matchups with UFC 244 coming up and how stacked the card is. I mean, we have fights from top to bottom. The main card is full of crazy fighters. And in the prelims, we still have a huge name in Johnny Walker that's going to be fighting. He got bumped into the prelims just a few weeks ago after, I believe, Gregor Gillespie's fight was announced. Corey Anderson versus Johnny Walker. Brick, who do you have in this fight?
Really quick, for anyone listening, if you get lost over these next few rounds, don't feel bad. We might not even announce when the new round is starting because we're just going fight pick, fight pick, fight pick. So with that being said, I take Johnny Walker in this fight, and I think it's hilarious that I got bumped down to no longer be in the main card. It's so funny because Johnny Walker, if you watch a highlight reel, half of his highlight reel is him dancing. Half of him is walking out wearing nothing but a tie. Like, the dude is a wannabe stripper in Vegas. Seriously. It's so bad. Isn't this the guy who hurt himself celebrating after a win, too?
His last win.
Yes. This dude, he is a clown. But I give it to him. He has got serious knockout power. And here's the other thing. Corey Anderson has 4 losses in his career, 3 of them by nasty knockouts. He went to sleep a couple of times, like bad, like real bad. So I give it to Johnny Walker. I think he's going to knock him out, either a standing KO or ground and pound, but I give it to Walker.
I'm interested to see, because I also have Johnny Walker. I'm interested to see how Johnny Walker actually does against him, because he said yesterday on Embedded, he said, I want to go 3 rounds. I want to tire this guy out, and I want to take him into deep waters, because Johnny Walker's never done that in the UFC, and nobody's ever seen it before, because he gets these first-round crazy knockouts and then has these fun celebrations. What blows me away is I want to go back and cover what you said about how this got cut to the prelims. This could be I know Dominic Reyes is really hot after his win over Chris Weidman, which was great. I'm really amazed that a guy in the prelims could be John Jones' next opponent. If Johnny Walker gets a legitimate enough win, maybe he fights John Jones over Dominic Reyes because he's so flashy, because he's so fun, because he's so marketable. What I would rather see is Johnny Walker versus Dominic Reyes for the top contender. I don't really like the idea of, Dominic Reyes beat Chris Weidman, so he gets to face John Jones. It's like, well, there's still Johnny Walker, who's a huge name. So, in my opinion, I agree with you. Corey Anderson has seen some nasty knockouts, and I think Johnny Walker is one of those guys that likes to distribute those nasty knockouts. So I'm going to go with Johnny Walker.
Love it. I do like how in the light heavyweight division, how it's basically a race for second place.
It really is.
It's just like, who can I beat that's going to let me fight John Jones?
Well, actually, I thought about doing my final thought on this and maybe I will in the future. Light heavyweight just needs to slow down and really find if and I know this sounds like John Jones versus the world, but like if we really want to find somebody who can beat John Jones, give the like really test these guys, because these young guys are coming in, or these guys who have 4 out of their last five fights or wins and something like that, and then they get a title shot, and it's just. I don't know. And I think with John Jones' last performance against Thiago Santos, he does look a little more beatable now. And until Thiago Santos is back, who I think if there is no new champion, that's the immediate next fight for John Jones is Thiago Santos against John Jones. I think John Jones will get another fight between either a Reyes or a Johnny Walker. But whatever the case is, we got to slow down these light heavyweights. We really got to hone in on their skills if we want somebody to beat John Jones.
And I don't, but I want to see another really good fight at light heavyweight. Now, next picks: Kevin Lee versus Gregor Gillespie. This one's going to be super fun. I'm so excited for this. We have 2 natural-born wrestlers, crazy wrestlers. Gregor Gillespie, an undefeated prospect, one of the only undefeated with double-digit wins in the UFC, going up against a monster in the Motown Phenom. I'm so excited.
So the last time Gregor Gillespie fought was in January, I believe, and it was the Henry Cejudo TJ Dillashaw card. And I remember watching that on my phone and going, who is this guy? I was like, oh my gosh. And we hadn't been working on the podcast yet, so I didn't even know you liked MMA at this point, Brick. But I was literally just like alone in my thoughts, just like, who is this guy and why? And I'm talking about Gregor Gillespie. How is he so good? Kevin Lee, his losses are against RDA, Ali Quina, and Tony Ferguson. He also has another loss, but those are like the bigger names. I think Gregor Gillespie is totally in that tier of fighters. I think he's right there with Ali Quinta and RDA. And maybe not a Tony, but maybe someday he'll be. And I think that Gregor Gillespie is maybe the guy that takes down Khabib, or maybe takes down Tony at some point. Like, he is, in my opinion, that good, and I really see him beating Kevin Lee.
See, forget for a minute, let's just forget that Kevin Lee exists. Can we just please ask the MMA gods to make something happen for me, please? Gregor Gillespie versus Marco Madsen at some point. That would be horrifying. That would be a wrestling match that would seriously give you the shakes. Now, that being said, I'm going to take Kevin Lee in this fight. Kevin Lee is so much more powerful of a striker. He's so much better of a striker. I think Kevin Lee is going to smack Gregor Gillespie on the button. I don't necessarily want to see Gregor Gillespie lose that spotless record, but the Motown Phenom is no joke. He's got serious power. He's got great wrestling. I think this comes from Kevin Lee by some miracle gaining the position on Gregor Gillespie and finishing with a TKO in some ground and pound.
All right. Next one. Round 4, let's jump into Derek Lewis versus Blagoy Ivanov. Is that how I say it?
Oh, yeah. I mispronounced it in the beginning. I said Ivanov. Either way, he's Russian. Whatever.
Blagoy Ivanov. All right. Brick, who do you have winning this fight? We're seeing Derek Lewis for the first time in a little bit. Who do you got?
I got Blagoy Ivanov.
Ivanov.
La.
It's like Zardrudas Ilgauskas. It's like,
I don't even know what you just said.
You remember Zardrudas?
No.
7'3" Cleveland Cavaliers center, went to the Heat at the end of his career.
Let's stick to one sport at a
Sorry.
time. I know you're a big sports guy, Blake, but geez. All right, I take Blagoy in this one. Here's why. Derek Lewis is becoming the punching bag of the heavyweight division.
Ooh.
Sadly, I really think he is. Like, he's got a couple of good submission wins over the last couple of years. He has the whole "my balls were hot," so that's why I took off my pants. Like, he's great, but Blagoy Ivanov is a powerful striker, and his highlight reel is nothing but great reach. Like, if you see, he's a heavyweight who has really good reach. He's got like a Stipe Miocic type reach. Like, he smacks fools from 4 feet away. And I think he's going to knock out Derek Lewis. I think it'll, again, either be from a takedown and a dominant position, ground and pound, or he's going to stand him up and he's going to put him back on the floor.
So here's the thing about Derek Lewis is he was on a 2-fight win streak when he got his. He was on a 2-fight win streak when he went up against Daniel Cormier for the title shot, and that just goes to show how kind of shallow the heavyweight division is at the moment. But Derek Lewis beat Francis Ngannou, which is like a crazy win. And then at UFC 229, the fight with Khabib and Conor, he was on that card, and he fought Alexander Volkov. And I don't know if you remember this fight, but Alexander Volkov was absolutely winning that fight. By all means, he was winning that fight. Derek Lewis got one good shot and sent him to the heavens, man. I mean, Derek Lewis knocked him the F out. But for the most part, Alexander Volkov was winning that fight. And so it is sad to say, but Derek Lewis kind of is maybe becoming more of a punching bag, more of a journeyman for the heavyweight division. He is getting up there a little bit in age, and his numbers in his fight numbers are adding up. I think Iganov beats this guy with 6 KOs, 6 submissions, and 6 decisions in his career, and he's never been knocked out. And he's never been knocked out. The only other guy in the top 10 of the heavyweight divisions that has also never been knocked out is Francis Ngannou. In a division that is where it's almost assumed that there's going to be a knockout, Blagoy Iganov is one of and Francis Ngannou are the two guys that really have never had to face that. And I don't think he's going to face that against Derek Lewis. If Blagoy beats Lewis, he gets to move up into title contention, in my opinion.
I think Blagoy makes a serious statement this weekend, and he, like you said, makes himself a big name in the heavyweight division because he's a dog. That was fun.
That was a good one. I like that one.
All right. Round 5, we're just going to have to rapid fire these because there's so many. So let's just stay like 15, 20 seconds per pick and just rapid fire them. I'm so excited. Round 5, Thompson versus Vicente Luque. I have Vicente Luque, the man who defeated Mike Perry in a 3-round just destruction match. I don't think Thompson is as fresh as Luque is. I think Luque is making a bit of a come up in the division, and I think he starches him.
This and Till and Gastelum are the two toughest ones for me to decide. I think that Thompson has this one. I think he's had a good amount of time to sit back, recollect himself after that Anthony Pettis loss, and with back-to-back losses to Till as well. I think Luque is on his 4th fight of this year. He's been very, very active, but he also just went to a war with Mike Perry. And we all typically see, I mean, not always, but a lot of times when a fighter goes through a war where they really have a tough time fighting a guy, you usually see them kind of look slower in their next fight because those bigger, more bloody fights take a toll on you. So I'm going to take Stephen Thompson in terms of he's rested. He has fought this year, but he's taken a little bit of time to take care of himself, whereas Vicente Luque comes out of one of the craziest fights of the year and immediately jumps back in, I think, 2 or 3 months after.
Yeah, it is a quick turnaround, but I like Vicente. I like his show that he put on against Mike Perry. I don't know. It's going to be a good fight. These last 3 fight picks that we're going to do in this round 5 are so unbelievably difficult to make. And because we love the sport and we love who's listening, we're going to do our best. So now the next one, Till Gastelum. I'm just going to go ahead and say I'm going with Gastelum.
Really?
I am. Till is coming off of a nasty knockout against George Masvidal. And in my opinion, the only reason that Kelvin Gastelum did not take that win from Israel Adesanya and go into a unification title shot with Robert Whittaker is because Izzy has a great chin. We've seen Darren Till doesn't. I don't know. He was undefeated up until I think last year when he fought Tyron Woodley. So I mean, he's still a great fighter, and the fact that he's jumping up a weight class makes this even more difficult. But I think Gastelum catches him. I think he has more power, and I think he just gets that one shot that Izzy got on Whittaker, and he's going to drop Till, and I think he pounces on him and he finishes him.
So I think what I think is interesting about this, excuse me, Darren Till is going up in weight class. And one thing that was crazy about Darren Till was he was one of those guys. There's a few people like an Aspen lad who they're just known for cutting almost too much weight, where it's like, dude, I don't know if you should be doing this. Till finally said, enough is enough. I'm going to go up to 185 pounds of more natural weight. I think he's still cutting. He must be if he was cutting down so much to 170. I'm pretty sure he's still cutting down, but you are more susceptible to knockouts when you cut so much weight. And so for me, I think Darren Till is bigger now, and he's young enough, and he's still absolutely in his prime. So him being at a more comfortable weight is a little bit safer than, say, an older guy like a Chris Weidman going up to a heavier weight division. When you're younger, you can still take those shots. I think Dill being bigger than Kelvin Gastelum, being longer than him, having an 83% takedown defense, because I can almost guarantee you Gastelum is coming in here saying 1-2s into a single leg, into a double leg. He's going to try to get this fight onto the ground. The idea of Till going up against a Kelvin Gastelum with an 83% takedown defense, with a more natural weight. He's going to be more comfortable, and I think he does win this fight, but this is by far the biggest toss-up where if Gastelum wins, I'm not surprised by any means.
All picks aside, what a debut in the middleweight division. You're facing a former interim champ in Kelvin Gastelum. Welcome to the division, Darren Till. That's pretty bold of the UFC. I like it, though. I like it. This is going to be a great weekend of fights.
So much respect for both of these guys, too. I love Kelvin Gastelum.
All right.
The granddaddy.
Here we go. Masvidal Diaz. This one I lost sleep over, man. I texted my brother, who's a big UFC fight, and I asked him his pick. I've talked to my dad about it. Man, I do not know. My official pick, though, is going to be Nate Diaz. I think Nate Diaz is going to tie him up. I think he's going to submit him on the ground with some jiu-jitsu, either a triangle choke or a guillotine, or he's going to do something. Masvidal, I think just Diaz has superior ground game, and I think that's the way that it's going to go. I don't think Masvidal is going to knock him out with a flying knee, although that's what my brother predicted. We'll see, though.
My question all week has been, is he going to open with it? And I really hope he does. I mean, he opened it with Darren Till. He opened with it with Ben Askren, and it turned out really good the first time.
Can you imagine?
I think Nate Diaz knows that and doesn't even think about. Yeah, I mean, the only person you're going to really get that with is Ben Askren. You're never going to get another guy to shoot a double leg when you're throwing a flying knee.
Rip.
So, anyways, I go with Diaz as well. I was actually talking about this with a bunch of my buddies at jiu-jitsu yesterday, and it's not because we're all jiu-jitsu guys and we think that, jiu-jitsu is so superior. It's because Diaz looked so good against Anthony Pettis. It wasn't his jiu-jitsu, it was his wrestling. It was his ability to hold down Anthony Pettis and his ability to outbox him. I think my buddy was telling me, and I'm sure this is correct, he hit like a 12 combination punch combo to end, I believe, round 2 against Anthony Pettis. Nate Diaz is so good, and he looked so good against Anthony Pettis, and if he continues to do that, I think he's right there with title contention. Does this next fight give you a title shot? Because Masvidal was offered Kamaru Usman when Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman wasn't happening. Does this mean that the next fighter gets a title shot? I also think about this. When I think about Masvidal's win against Darren Till, it was absolutely an incredible knockout. Hats off to him. But like I said, Till is very susceptible to getting knocked out. And again, great knockout. The Ben Askren one, as much as it was awesome and it was skill and as much as he had thought about it, it was a little lucky. Let's say Ben Askren misses it. Let's say Ben Askren is somehow able to dodge it. Maybe it doesn't hit him as hard, and then they go on to continue that fight, and Ben Askren takes him to the ground. I don't think Masvidal beats him. I don't. And so Nate Diaz going up against Jorge Masvidal for this BMF, for this possible 170-pound belt, this title shot, I think Nate Diaz beats him.
All I got to say, after all this, poor Leon Edwards.
Oh,
poor Leon Edwards.
Guy.
He had so much hype, and then Masvidal punched him in the face in behind the curtain, and now there's this BMF title, and Leon Edwards is slowly slipping out of title contention, and he hasn't done anything wrong. He didn't do anything wrong. He's done nothing wrong.
Well, I remember, I think it was episode 1 or episode 2 that we talked back when we were in our freaking BYU shack, and we were talking about all the welterweights and everything that's going on, and every fighter has had an opportunity since then that we've talked about to either decide your fate, whether you're not as legit as you were, get your redemption fight back, still be in title contention if you're one of those 4 guys. And Leon Edwards is just chilling. If
he had just not said anything to Jorge Masvidal in the background, he wouldn't have gotten slapped around. And he would possibly be, it was hilarious. Let's just talk about, for 30 seconds, how crazy it was when we found out that Diaz might not be in this fight. Everyone was calling it off, saying it wasn't going to happen, just trying to make tabloids and headlines. Leon Edwards, poor guy. Did you see? He posted on Twitter and he was like, I'm not going to be there because they don't want to give me the shot, so I'm not going to be there, whatever. And the world was kind of like, dude, we weren't really expecting you to. We were hoping it was going to be either Conor McGregor or Kamaru or Cowboy. Poor Leon Edwards is like, I know you guys wanted me to go, but I'm not going to do it. And everyone's like, it's okay. It's okay.
Sadly, nobody cares about Leon Edwards today at the end of 2019. But I really hope that he gets his due diligence.
He will.
Gets what he deserves. Also, really quick, sorry, just another big thing. Dustin Poirier coming out and what he said to Nate Diaz
yeah.
and all those things. Then he comes back out and apologizes. That really gave me kind of a sour taste in my mouth about Dustin Poirier. I didn't really like it at all.
I kind of respected it. He
really
well, because he was talking a lot of trash about Nate Diaz and the whole "you're a cheater, you're calling everyone else a cheater." But DP actually came back and made a tweet basically apologizing and
he did,
and saying, you know what, I know you're clean, whatever, doesn't matter. I still want to beat you up. I respect that, and I like that. He is still sticking to this opponent he never got to face, and he just has this bitter, like, I want this rivalry. But Dustin Poirier is not the same guy he was pre-Khabib. Yeah. Everyone knows it. Now he lost to Khabib in kind of a sad way. Just got demolished. And then he got big brothered by Khabib. Khabib brought him aside after beating him up. He's like, hey, give me your shirt. I will trade shirt with you, and I will give you money. Like, he totally just got big brothered by a guy who just kicked his butt. And now he's like trying to call out Conor McGregor. That fight's not going to happen. He's calling out other people, and he's just kind of like sticking his nose in other people's business. He's not the same Dustin Poirier he used to be. It's kind of sad. I wanna see him get a good fight and kind of get back on his feet, because right now he's slowly slipping into the Leon Edwards of the lightweight division.
The worst thing happened to you that could happen to any fighter. You got civilized. Mickey Goldmill from Rocky III. The world of MMA has always said, you know you're done when you no longer love it, when you no longer want it. Not necessarily when you can't win anymore, but when you no longer have a love for the grind, the discipline, the training, the weight cut, and simply a love for the sport of MMA. When this happens, we all can see it. The fighter gets caught up in building a business, podcasting, maybe a YouTube channel. And that's totally okay. It's hard to be great for a long period of time. It's hard to become a legend. When Tyron Woodley was about to fight Kamaru Usman this last March, he had been on top of the 170-pound division for almost 3 years. But during that time, he had also gotten a show on TMZ. He was promoting a rap album, spending more time in the sound booth rather than in the gym. Brendan Schaub continued to fight despite his desire to go into stand-up comedy and begin podcasting with people like Joe Rogan and Brian Callen. Again, that's okay, but it's hard to be at the top when you're doing all these other things. It's hard to be at the top when you have so many other things on your plate. And it's hard to be on top when your actions say that you don't want it anymore, or at least not as much. Prior to Saturday, I was concerned by something Ben Askren had said a few weeks ago. I don't have the direct quote, but it was something to the extent of, I don't even like training MMA. I like wrestling. He expressed that as well on Helwani's show yesterday after the fight. And I don't blame him. He was retired for 2 years, came out of retirement to fight in the UFC. 2 years older, 2 years of not training as hard, tougher competition, and a division waiting to maul the most hyped man to get into the UFC in recent history. It was never going to be easy for Ben Askren, and he's now learning that. Not to mention his business, his love for cryptocurrency, his enjoyment of trolling on Twitter, disc golf, daily vlogs, and podcasts. When you don't want this anymore, it's time to be done. It's hard to be great, and it's hard to be focused. It's hard to hold on to your legacy. As Mickey continued on to say from that quote, presidents retire, generals retire, horses retire, men of war retire. That's what you should do. Retire. Ben Askren is one of the greatest wrestlers ever, one of the most memorable fighters of all time. If you're thinking about it, it's time. And that's totally okay.
All right, final thoughts via the great Blake O'Rulian. Love it every week.
Thank you.
It's always great. It's always great.
Thank you.
Speaking of every week, we are happy to have brought you episode 11 of From the Nosebleeds MMA Podcast. Join us next week when we do it again. We're going to run it back. We are going to be talking about post BMF title. We'll probably be talking about some more UFC events in the future. Definitely 245 is coming up, so we're excited about that one.
Yes, sir.
Do not forget to tune in on YouTube, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much any way that you can listen to our voices. Go ahead. Even if you want to give us a call and we'll just talk to you for a little bit, that'd be great. We could just talk MMA on the phone. So once again, thanks for joining us, Blake.
I just wanted to say really quick, I'm really proud of you for not putting John Jones in one of your top fives. I think for the first time ever, including women's fighters. Dobie Richard, send us off.
Wow.